Hello, thanks for checking out today's video. My name is Zach. I'm a lifelong sci-fi fantasy reader since the 90s, and I've also read more than my fair share of personal development and self-help books over the years. And that is what I'm reviewing and giving my thoughts on today, which is Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. So earlier, I recently read Practicing the Power of Now, which is the shortened, condensed version of this book. And after reading that short read and getting some of the practical advice, I did want to dive into the main book, The Power of Now, and check out from the local library. That's what I just finished earlier this week. My one sentence thought on the book, it is that it is way too much. It is very spiritual. I see why people say that they've had a life-changing experience listening to his thoughts in this book, The Power of Now, and his follow-up book, A New Earth. They really can change the way you think, and that's definitely one of the strengths of the books. It's very practical advice, and a very understanding yourself, your person advice. It's hard to describe, which is where I'm going to go into with this. If you've read other personal development books, a lot of the thoughts and themes, I did see a lot of similarities, which you often see in this genre, that the books are, a lot of the times in personal development, are saying the same things. It's just the author is abstracting those core ideas in their own way, telling it with their own stories, and maybe that resonates to you. So if you're looking for a more spiritual, and the word of this book is mindful way of viewing yourself, identity, and kind of how to approach the world, The Power of Now might be the answer you're seeking. This might be what resonates with you. So the main themes of the book are, as I mentioned, mindfulness. So as the title implies, The Power of Now, it's all about living in the present moment. It's being aware of what you're doing right now. And I love that idea of not thinking about time in the sense of psychological time and clock time. So don't get attached to what happened in the past, what may happen in the future, but what is under your control right now. That is where you'll find peace. And taking that even one step deeper, one idea that I loved in this, and I mentioned in my talk about practicing the power now, is that of observing the mind right now. So this is the concept that I had read in another book by Michael Singer's The Untethered Soul, and it's a practice that I try and do at least a couple times a week with the Apple Fitness Plus meditation exercises, and that's observing your thoughts primarily through meditation. So it's seeing your mind as someone having the thoughts and the self being two separate entities. It teaches you, especially in meditation, to not get attached to thoughts and to recognize thoughts and feelings as just that, thoughts and feelings. They don't define who you are. They're just emotional responses that you can, with practice, become the outside observer to understand yourself better and be in better control over your emotions and feelings. Some of the other main concepts of the book are accepting whatever is happening in the present and then figuring a way out and taking steps forward based on what is under your control at this present moment. And his kind of main thesis is that there is peace and stillness in being in the now and practicing this whole philosophy of the power of now. I loved kind of the way the book was set up as kind of a mentorship. So it's totally, he's talking and kind of speaking his gospel, for lack of better terms, to a student. And as I'm listening to the audiobook, he'll explain a concept. And maybe in my mind, I kind of had a rebuttal to, well, what about this? Or what about that? And interesting, the way the book is written is that he has the student kind of pop in and actually vocalize those questions. Well, if you're being in the present moment, what about if you're sick? How do you detach yourself from being sick? And then Tolle will kind of give his thoughts and how to deal with even some rebuttals you may have. So I found that very powerful, that he kind of, as designing this book to be this kind of learning tool, that he not only has his main core ideas that he gets across, but he also comes up with some counterpoints and explains ways to kind of approach anything you may think that might not fit your current mold, and how to deal with it in his terms. So that said, speaking of gospel, an interesting way the book is written, which may or may not resonate with you, is that he kind of speaks a lot of terms, and he mentions like Zen Buddhism and Sufism, the practices of mindfulness, such as being aware of your body, being aware of your thoughts and feelings. But he also makes references to Christian thinking, and he mentions the Bible and passages from the Bible, and how these allegories and Bible stories are actually related to the power of now, that they're an allegory for dealing with this one issue. It's maybe Jesus saying, be more present and do this. And so that may turn you on or off. The fact that he does kind of make it a secular look of not particularly preaching to you, but making it relatable, that even if you're familiar, as an American growing up Christian, I was familiar with these stories, so they did resonate with me. I understood kind of where he was coming from, but he's definitely not preaching religion to you. He's just kind of showing how through religions that stories and concepts are encouraging people to be more present and live in the moment, in the power of now, be more mindful, which is kind of the current way that we talk about it in the West in 2024, mindfulness. So that's one key thing that may or may not turn you off. Another, again, speaking of similarities to other works, I've read a lot of self-help / personal development over the years. As I mentioned, they have a lot of the same concepts. One that came to mind that I hadn't read in a little while, it's been probably a year, I guess, since the last time I read, was Designing Your Life. This book is a great book, and I highly recommend it. And it's something interesting that a lot of the concepts of the power of now seem like they came straight from the Designing Your Life. So it's that concept with personal development in general, that Designing Your Life, they're Stanford Design School professors. So do you want kind of like a male-dominated professorship academic kind of look, applying design thinking to your life and how you can design a better life using design principles? Or maybe you need a more spiritual view of some of these same principles of taking action in your career, and the power of now might be that answer. And that's, again, a bigger topic of personal development in general, is you can abstract these ideas to fit your situation. So for myself, as a recent graduate of a master's program, I was in that frame of reference of careers changing, job switching, job hunting. So a lot of the concepts that Tolle's talk about in The Power of Now, I can, in my head, make the connection of this can apply to a new graduate. This can apply to a job seeker. So, for example, both Designing Your Life and The Power of Now mention reframing your situation. Tolle talks about it in the perspective of being in the moment, being in the now, whereas design thinking is reframing it as just the general concept of reframing it, looking at a problem as not a problem, but can you look at it a different way? Like maybe you just got recently laid off due to budget cuts. That's a bad thing. Yes, you just lost your identity and the career. But if you reframe that, is this also an opportunity to explore a passion project that you may have, take a pivot, take a break before you go back to work? That's what reframing is. How Tolle would look at that is, in a similar manner, he also mentions reframing in the book, but also in the now. What can I now, where I'm at? I just lost my job. That's now. Having the job is in the past. Searching for the jobs in the future. Okay, so what steps can I take right now to figure this out? And a concept that, on this kind of line of thought of figuring out problems, is what he talks about is they're not problems, they're situations. If you call something a problem, it assigns emotional baggage to something because it's a bad thing. But that reframe mindset from Designing Your Life or The Power of Now, in looking at problems as situations, as things that can be solved by looking at it differently and by planning out steps of action in the now. What can I do in this moment to take action? And that bias to action is a key concept of designing your life that I found very helpful, and Tolle also talks about it, that bias to action, but kind of with the slant of bias to the now. So right now, in this moment, what can I do? Bias to action. Can I make incremental progress? Is the bias to action right now? Maybe it is planning, but don't get lost in the plan, because right now, okay, I want to spend a little time maybe mapping out my career change plan, but I also can, start working my resume, applying to jobs. What can I do right now in this moment? And going deeper on this, because again, this is what resonated with me as a recent graduate myself, it's focusing on the process, not the outcome. So it's puts the effort into the present task, not the outcome. So I want to shift my mindset, reframe my thinking to being in the now, being in the moment of the steps I can take in this moment towards that goal. And another key concept that was for me like a light bulb moment that I will take away from this is, speaking of goals, look at goals as directions, not outcomes. So he does talk about goals, and I kind of myself, one way to look at the book is, okay, he's telling you to live in the moment, but this isn't to, the old couple years ago YOLO life set, just disregard any sorts of plan. You shouldn't just become a hermit monk that lives only in the now, in the present moment. That having goals is fine, but looking at it as directions, so that when you reframe, what happens to you, either setbacks or accomplishments, that they are just points of time in the now, and now that it's gone, it's now in the past. Okay, now what's the next thing to do? How can I move on from here in this present moment? What's the next action I take in the direction of my goals? So that's an interesting way to also expand on some of the concepts of other personal development books of this bias to action, thinking in the moment, and getting detached from time. He talks about goal setting a bit. Speaking down this line of thought of goals and actions is you break down these future challenges, these future directions into incremental steps, the steps that you can take in the moment. Very common concepts across a lot of personal development books, but reframed in the sense of now. So with that mindset of in the now, what can I accomplish now? How can I break this down into now moments and look at it from a sense of what's accomplished now? Because another key concept was removing time from the equation, that there is psychological time, which is the worrying about time, and then the clock time that passes day to day. So I'm not worrying about necessarily things I did right or wrong in the past, or what these actions may lead me to, but I'm focusing on the present task in the moment. And you can look at this, and I kind of had those questions of, okay, maybe this isn't totally, I can get caught up with no plans, and I'm just going to be, action oriented and take actions. But again, the concept of direction, that I'm setting a direction for my career, I'm setting a direction for my life, and then I'm taking small incremental steps that are in the moment. That what can I do in this moment towards that, steering the ship and enjoying the journey. And that's, speaking of sci-fi fantasy, my favorites, but Stormlight Archive, Journey Before Destination. It is about the journey, and the power of now is about where we are right now, enjoying that moment. Some more practical, like hands-on mindfulness activities he mentions, and I mentioned in my talk of practicing the power of now, is doing things like full body scans. So you're, washing the dishes and you're feeling the soap suds on your hands. You're sitting in a park and you feel the warm wind on your skin. You hear the birds in the background. You feel the park bench under your butt as you're sitting down. You feel the weight of the earth and gravity pulling you, and you're just in the moment, in that mindfulness kind of seated meditation. And that's the power of now, of letting everything go and being just with yourself and identifying and understanding yourself. So one last concept to talk about as I look through my notes real quick is on that sense of self is Tolle's thoughts on identity. And he does teach in the book to detach yourself from labels, roles, and history. Again, trying to take time out of the equation of don't define yourself about your past experiences, but define yourself, define your true self, which is in the moment. So an example he gives is don't label yourself at work as, say, a high achiever, but rather you're someone who is curious and dedicated. So it's kind of taking apart the labels on accomplishments and also related to his thoughts on goals that don't focus on the label of being number one salesperson, number one, recruiter, but being recognized as someone who is curious, who's dedicated, who's studious. This also ties into Atomic Habits, where James Clear talks about identity-based habits. And I thought this is, again, who came up with the idea first, or is it just one of those fundamental truths in personal development that you could package different ways? And so if you've read Atomic Habits, identity-based goals was another, light bulb key concept moments of not being attached to labels, but being attached to action. So that's that same idea that Tolle's talking about. Clear talks about it, says being a writer. I don't want to be a writer. I am someone who writes. And that the habits develop your sense of identity. Doing the thing is the identity. It's not the label you attached to becoming something. So in James Clear, it's removing the future label of one day becoming a writer. No, I'm not one day going to become a writer. Through my now moment, through my atomic habit of writing every day, I'm someone who writes. And someone who writes is kind of by association, is an author, is a writer. And it's the identity flexibility that you're not attached to labels. It's the experience. And then each role is a learning experience, that don't be caught up in setbacks, because someone who writes will eventually maybe have, they might not publish the first time, or they might run into setbacks, but you're still someone who writes. You might not be a published author, but you're someone who writes. And that's your identity. Someone who runs every day. You're not a runner. You're someone who runs every day. So again, it's the journey, not the destination. All in all, there's a lot of thoughts, and there's just so much to this book. It's one of those books I probably shouldn't have read in one sitting. It's one of those books where you probably would be good to go back to it here and there, 5 minutes here and there every day, kind of like a religious text where you kind of study it, but there's just so much takeaway and you really want to internalize it. So if you've read other personal development books like I have, and I've mentioned a couple different ones like Designing Your Life and Atomic Habits, but there's many other ones. I got on another kick for a personal development book after this called Everything is Figure Outable. It's funny because there are, again, a lot of same concepts of Power of Now and Design Your Life are in that book. But the Power of Now was great. I really enjoyed it. I would probably give this 4.5 out of 5. It was really good. It's maybe not for everyone. Again, it's on the spectrum of kind of like accessibility. It's a little more on the spiritual woo-woo side versus something like Atomic Habits, which is definitely more generalized. It's kind of for the mass market. Anyone can kind of pick that up and relate to the stories. Whereas the Power of Now does deal with more deeper issues of your sense of self and sense of identity. So if you're looking for a deeper dive into personal development, I definitely would say give this book a shot, The Power of Now. And I want to read his next book. I think A New Earth is also highly regarded, and it's the follow-up to this, so it has his later philosophies and teachings. So I will add that to my queue after I kind of shift genre a bit and get back to some sci-fi fantasy. So thanks for listening to my thoughts and review of Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. Have a great one.